Carl.
How are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. Been a great week.
Good. We've had a good week. So, welcome everybody to FRB Vibe, and welcome to YouTube who are joining us for the first time this week. So, welcome everybody. So, Stuart, we always sort of talk through upcoming sessions and sessions we've just had, and I think this week we're looking forward to the diversity and inclusion session that's running on Tuesday, 10 o'clock. Anyone wants to join that, go to frb.buzz. So, then we're going to have a quick look at the post office and the NHS scandals that are going on at the moment. We're going to avoid the election. This is an election-free zone. So we'll have a look at that, and we're going to say to ourselves, could this happen again today? Could this be happening now? We're going to have an examination of that. But first, the diversity session is coming up, Stuart. We're going to look at what is the future for diversity and inclusion. And for me, this is an interesting question that really comes from the last 3 or 4 discussions we've had that are indicating that the subject needs to broaden, needs to be a broader church. Inclusivity needs to be more inclusive. And that really is going into subjects like a broader social inclusion, so different educational backgrounds, different social backgrounds, certainly into neurodiversity in a more meaningful way, as well as some of the mental health issues, etc., etc. You even get to a point where you're thinking, should we encourage different mindsets and things? Now, what is that going to mean for diversity and inclusion? Is it going to mean that, to be honest, people get bigger budgets because they're covering more? Because diversity and inclusion is one of those subjects at the moment which everyone we talk to is sort of struggling for funding to get as much things done as they'd like. Is it going to broaden that? Is it going to make it a healthier, bigger part of a business? Or are we living a dream here? I don't know. Is it following the same course as customer experience did a few years ago, when it had to get bigger, so the budgets were bigger, and then it became everybody's business, so the budgets purely for customer experience sort of shrunk? What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I guess, if budgets to increase, it would I guess demonstrate there's greater awareness. But I'd argue you'd almost want the objective to be no budget, because you'd want it to be so ingrained and so business as usual that there is no budget allocated to this stuff, right? Because it is in the business. It's completely engendered, right? So I think it's a difficult one, isn't it? So I'm with you. Customer experience did go through that process of getting more money to do more things before it got to the stage of needing less money because it was ingrained. And maybe that's what's going to happen on diversity and inclusion. I certainly think the trend is going that way, in terms of even just the title. Everyone used to talk about diversity 10, 15 years ago. Is moved to equality and inclusion and other things which I think are much more broader, much more all-rounded, right? So I think so there's good evidence it's going probably in a good direction, but is it going fast enough? Does it need more money? Is it at the stage where it needs less money? Probably not, right? That would be my view.
It's difficult to know, isn't it? Because also I think there's a what's the objective here varies, and it's one of those subjects that can be hijacked by one or two issues, just the same as customer experience used to, and many other things that have an evolution of business. They can be hijacked. But if you, I like something you say quite a lot, Stuart, in the discussions, is this is really about expanding the talent pool, right? It's expanding the breadth of the different people you can get involved in an organization. Now, even as I'm saying that, some companies, some individuals are thinking, don't want to do that. I want uniformity because I can control uniformity. I know what I'm getting. But other companies, and I guess a lot of the companies you've been involved in, actually thrive on that diversity. And I think that's where companies need to be heading, need to be thinking about this, is really, it's about the people you can get in the door. and the skills, the capabilities, the different mindsets you can bring into a company. And if you can do that, then you're going to, by definition, you're going to expand what that company can do. You're going to have a different approach. That might not suit everybody. I guess there are times when companies may not want that, but I think in general, as things evolve, companies need to be more responsive. They need to embrace lots of different things. They need to do lots of different avenues, lots of different channels out to customers. So I think that broadness of mindset and approach is really where companies are heading to.
Yeah, I think you could argue that if you weren't affected by wider society changes, customer changes, technology changes, you're in a steady state business, you're going to do the same thing you've done for the last 10 years, for the next 50 years, you're not interested in innovation, then actually having a steady state, everyone works the same procedurally, systematically, you're not employing people to necessarily think, you're employing people to follow process and do. Then you could argue that hiring people like you, that think like you, act like you, want the same things as you, makes life a lot easier, doesn't it? And it will generate results. The problem with that, of course, is that I don't think there is a business on the planet that is isolated in that way, right? Whether you want to change your product and services or not, I can guarantee you that your competition will be, your customers will be, technology will, things are going to change around you, and therefore you cannot stay still. You will have to continually evolve and change and innovate. And if you want to innovate and change, then you need people that can think differently, act differently, be different, in order to either respond to or help drive those changes, right? And therefore you don't want people like you. You want as much, you want to appreciate as much diversity in thought and act as you can, because that will generate the broader set of opportunities for you.
Yeah, you're right. As you were talking now, I was trying to think of an industry. I got a background in engineering and things, and I was trying to think of an industry that does stay still for quite a long time. And there are a few where seemingly the product sort of stays very similar for a long time, but those are shrinking really quickly. And I got to add, the way things are produced and manufactured is changing rapidly, more rapidly than any other time. I would imagine since steam came along and the first engineering first got things going from that automation perspective. Everything is changing. Look at logistics. Look at farming. Everything is changing. So I don't think anyone can afford to stand still, and that's a difficult place for companies to be. It takes us into discussions around leadership that we've had before, where if you've got a leadership which is really thinking, okay, it's not going to hit me for a couple of years, I'm safe. The next incumbent can have a go at this. I think even that has shrunk right back. So I think it has a great diversity inclusion, has a bigger role to play than it's ever had before. And don't get me wrong, anyone listening in here, we don't want to lose the gains we've made for lots of different groups that need help and support and deserve help and support. Right? We're not talking about rolling back on any of those things, but I think it does need to get broader. I think it also, and we'll see on Tuesday, it'll help the engagement with the rest of the business. I think that will be important.
I mean, it came out of our last session, didn't it? So our last session on diversity and inclusion, we focus heavily on the construction of, I guess, employee community groups. People call them different things in different places. And actually, the long and short of it all was, we fundamentally believe it was a good thing if it was done in the right way, right? And it is. There's a big if in there, right?
Yeah.
And that's because whichever way you look at minority groups, and minority in any context, it could be the fact you have a smaller group of females in a male-orientated business. It could be anything, ethnicity. It doesn't matter what it is. Thinking styles, neurology, whatever. But if you've got a minority group, they tend to have less of a voice. They tend to have less confidence to use that voice, right? And therefore, creating a community around some of those minority groups empowers them, gives them a voice that can make them be heard, at a much larger, more productive level within the company, and therefore is a good thing. But the if that we keep talking about is they should be set up inclusively. You can't set up a group that creates a sense of belonging just for that group, because then what you're fueling, some of the diversity issues that you're actually trying to resolve, right? So they have to be formed in a very inclusive way, to help the voice for those groups come to life in a very positive way for positive outcomes.
Yeah, otherwise you're in danger of highlighting the differences, which is not what you're trying to do. You're trying to complete the opposite to that. And I was also interested in those groups as there was sort of like a lot of unintended consequences from these groups. And that is, it gave people the opportunity to organize, lead these groups, and collaborate in ways they hadn't collaborated before, develop skills that they just wouldn't have otherwise. I just thought that was terrific. One of the companies especially was recognizing that, and that people were starting to put that on their CV, and it was part of their review program. And they were finding that they could actually, on any subject, because they now got the skills, they could form a collaborative team around a subject, which they wouldn't even have dreamt of being able to do before. And I think that's really important. And I think as we look at this more and more, we see more positive things come out of it than we might expect in the first place, which is difficult. Another thing that came out of that, I don't know if you picked it up, or it might have been a conversation I've had with somebody, Stuart, before our next session, this idea of inclusivity passports. Now, this was something that came out where people could actually have a passport, a document that they took to an employer, said, these are the things I need. These are the way I work best. This is some of the support I need. Basically, this is how you get the best out of me. And I thought that was a whole load of things went on in my mind at the first place, straight away. Is that going to be received positively by the employer? How much courage does it take to do that as you join a new company? There are lots of good and bad I can see in that. What are your thoughts?
Well, I would like to think that it's a wholly good idea and a wholly good thing, and that potential new employers would see that as a real positive, that they're getting an insight into an individual's needs from day one, to know how best to look after them, to lead them, to nurture them, to get the most out of them for their own company benefits, right? So you'd like to think it's a really good thing. I guess, to your point, would all companies see it that way, or would some companies see it as a problem child? I don't know, right? And actually, wouldn't it be best if we get to the stage where every company, as part of the hiring process, almost asks as part of the application process that type of passport, personal characteristic information, so that they could know how to get the most out of the individuals they're looking to hire, right? I mean, it's it's chicken and egg, I guess. So I think it's a really interesting idea. I think you need to be looking to apply for companies who are going to take that open arms and in the right way, rather than in any type of negative context.
And it's really difficult, Stuart, because in these discussions we've had lots of conversation around disclosure. When do you? How do you? And it's a very difficult problem. Immediately, I'm thinking: is this during the interview process, or is this something you declare after you've got the job? And I would think at this stage it's probably something you declare after you've got the job. To be honest, in this current where we are now, I think it'd be something to say, okay, I'm coming to work for you. I'm delighted to work for you. This is about me. Because I think if in most circumstances, to be realistic, if you were to talk about that sort of thing at an interview, you can't prove it, but my gut feel is that would be detrimental to you getting the role.
I think also, I think sometimes the line manager leader of that individual may not necessarily be the person who interviews. I mean, sometimes it's a sort of a disconnected process, right? Depending on the volume and the type of people you're hiring. Ultimately, I think if you're a great manager leader, then you will be looking out for those personal characteristics, asking those types of questions day one of employment, to get to know the individuals that you've got in your team in order to then get the most out of them. But again, do every manager and leader do that? Not so sure.
And are people confident in declaring? And I guess it's at the heart of what this is all about. But going back to the start of the conversation, I think the more a broad spectrum of things are talked about, the easier it is for everyone to say. So I think that's really important, especially when we're talking about neurodiversity, or we're talking about things like mental health, those sort of issues. I think are much easier if everybody's talking about everything. Then it becomes much easier, because if everyone was totally honest, okay, if you had a minority of anything, it would be a minority of normal. They would be sitting in the corner, one or two of them that are normal, if you could even describe it. So if we could talk about these things, it would be so much easier. And that leads us to another subject in here, is how do we talk about these things? And how do we correct some of the discrimination and things that happens? And that's an interesting conversation, because some companies find they have quite a few disciplinary situations, where my view and a lot of people's view is, by the time you get to a disciplinary, you failed. Okay, that's gone too far. And as Nigel Keyes said a long time ago in one of our sessions, you get what you tolerate. And I think that's where we're trying to get to with this, is that low level interaction or slight correction on people's behavior, which is going to be where this is when we know we're successful. And I think you probably had that and helped to install that at First Direct. Do you recognize that?
Yeah, I think so. I think, I've been fortunate enough to be in positions where I can probably influence some of those sort of, I guess, cultural norms that you're trying to establish. I mean, I think First Direct was in a fantastic place before I joined. Interestingly, I think they had a great, very open culture. I think, and obviously I've taken some of that learning elsewhere, such as Atom. But you need. It's like, I think we're getting back to sort of, I guess, some of the customer experience versus sort of cultural inclusion things. It's not just the fact you get what you tolerate. So it only works when it all works is another fantastic slogan, right?
Yeah.
Customer experiences was like that. You can do 90% of it absolutely right, but you make one big failure, which is the 10%, and people, when they talk about the experience, they talk about the 10%, not the other 90%. You've got to get it all right, and the same is true for inclusivity. You've only got to have one rotten apple that you tolerate, and actually it completely undermines all the other good things that you're trying to do, right? And therefore it just doesn't work. You've got to not tolerate these things. You've got to act very openly and very timely. You've got to squash any type of negative behavior, else it would just be accepted as the norm and okay, and it will undermine anything else you do.
Yeah, and I agree. I like this scenario of some of the big headline things, and then you've got the small stuff. As you know, you spend a lot of time going around and talking and being in conversation with lots of different organisations around the UK and Europe. And it fascinated me that quite often there'd be a scenario where something big has happened, perhaps a merger or something of that nature, and it becomes ingrained in the general conversation that people would talk about doing something, this project is going, and then they say, oh yeah, but we can't do it because these guys will stop us. right? It's not what they do. And you think, well, hang on a go, guys. That was 15 years ago. In a banking situation I was in, I think, sorry, I thought that takeover happened 15 years ago. And they said, oh, it did. I thought, right, so it's still true, is it? That excuse, that norm, is still built in. And I think around the diversity subjects, I think some of those are still there. And I think those are the things that we need, that diversity needs to get into tackling. I don't know how. It'd be great to talk to the guys on Tuesday about how they're tackling some of those things, because that openness, that acceptance of others, is not going to flourish unless you sort of stop those descending voices, so that you don't get that escalation. We both know as coaching people, the best interventions are early on. Okay, and if you can help relationships, you can move relationships by looking at the transactions and just dealing with the low level stuff, adult, parent, child, or whatever thing you want to use. If you can subtly change that relationship, then the bigger issues follow. So I think that's something that hopefully will come out in our discussions on Tuesday. But I'm certainly looking forward to it. I wonder how optimistic everybody is in where that subject's going. I don't know. I'll be fascinated to learn. And if you want to join us, contact us at frd.buzz, and we'll see if we can get you into the discussion. So next thing, Stuart, we always talk about a topical issue on the buzz, on the vibe. Did I say buzz or vibe? I should say vibe, shouldn't I? So the big news this week is obviously the election, which we're not going to tackle unless people really want us to. But we've had two scandals. So we've had the blood scandal with the NHS, and we've had the post office scandal. And it struck me and several other people I was listening to a little while ago. The challenging question was, could this happen today? Are things like that happening now that in 30 years we're going to be talking about, or 40 years, and say, how on earth did that happen? Because you look back on both of those things and you can't believe it happened. If someone made that as a film or a doc or something, or wrote a book like that, you say that's unreal. It's not going to happen. What are your thoughts? Do you think that is happening now, or do you think things have moved on?
I would love to think it's not happening now, and I guess that's what the Fellowship of Responsible Business is all about. But if it was not happening now, we probably wouldn't exist, right? I actually think it's happening more than you think. Not necessarily to the same scale. Who knows? But I think as a leader and as a CEO, as a board, you're constantly faced with challenges, short term versus long term, profit versus other dimensions, sustainability, customer. You could name all the things that you're charged with, and you're constantly trying to balance those things. And whether you consciously make decisions that are negative for one and positive for another, well, almost certainly you're doing that every day. The question is to what consequence, and is it to the level, I guess, of something like the post office scandal or blood scandal, where the consequences are actually you're incarcerating or actually killing people, right? I mean, that is just beyond belief, right? That you're making decisions to save the reputation of the company, or costs for the company, or profits for the company, at the level of incarcerating your employees who or have a strong, or certainly have enough doubt that they're probably innocent, right? And that is just unbelievable. But is it happening today? Well, Boeing would be a more recent example, right? These things are happening. You have got teams that are backing what might have been initially well-intended short-term decisions or white lies that as you cover them and reuse them, become bigger and bigger and bigger, but it also becomes bigger to get out of, that you keep on following. I think it's more ripe than you think.
I'm going to disagree with you here. I think I'm going to be optimistic. Okay. I think, is it that things are so much more transparent these days? There are so many more channels for people to raise concerns. There's so much more anonymity on social media, where people can blow the whistle. They can get in contact with an investigative journalist. Journalism itself, when it's done well, can be really good, and it can uncover some of these things in a way a government can't. I think things are too well examined. There's too much exposure now for people to get away with this stuff. So to sort of back up that point, the Boeing thing has come to light very quickly. Relatively quickly, that's come to light. We're not talking 30 years down the road. We're talking a door blew off, and all of a sudden, everything's. Let's hope most stuff has been exposed, and now we're aware of it. So I think there's a good chance that some of the things we don't like about our modern society are actually very good for us, and in exposing this stuff. We all get tired of hearing negative comment and people just trying to bring other people down, etc. But I think there is a good side to it that I tend to think it's going to be more and more difficult for companies to get away with this sort of behavior now than they could have done 30 years ago. Or am I just being over optimistic?
I think you're being extremely optimistic. I think that, like I say, I think some of this stuff with the initial decision it's not a black and white decision. It's a very grey.
Sure.
But then you've made the decision once, it happens again the following month. You think, well, I made it that way last month, I'm going to stay with it. I'm going to keep it great. And before you know it, you've got a much bigger animal, on your shoulders, right? And some of this stuff is hard to unpick and hard to undo, and it's not necessarily because the intention was necessarily wrong. Mm-hmm. It could have been well thought through. Intentions could have been honourable, but actually, is when do you admit that you're wrong, your mistake? And human nature, some people find that incredibly hard to do. And obviously, when you are defending the reputation and shareholders of a business, it is very hard to do. I don't underestimate that. But it takes a really brave, courageous leader to stand to the side and admit their wrongdoings, that wrong decision, and to expose it all and let it all then sort itself out, right? And the deeper you get, the harder it is to then get out of it, right? So again, I don't think this is necessary intended. I don't think any of this stuff was necessarily intended. But as soon as you get to the stage of covering up in whatever form you're covering up, you're just digging a massive big hole, aren't you?
And it's interesting because now we've got these two conversations that are going in the same direction. Is that it's the same as we're talking about, you get what you tolerate with diversity. It's the same here. You're better to tackle it early. This is going slightly wrong. We need to change direction on it. The earlier you can see that and the earlier you can do it, the less climb down there is, because otherwise brand reputation, the more companies trade on their reputation, which to a certain extent they should, the more value that has, the more difficult it is to trash that reputation. Where if you can say earlier on, didn't get this right, we need to change direction a little bit. So it's all about early intervention. And it also highlights, just thinking about this, we talk about so many things about responsible business, but how personal it is. It's down to the personal moral guidance or values of the individuals, because if you get to a point where legislation or something has to intervene, it's already too far, it's already gone. So,
and I guess that's my point, Carl. I think human nature, we want everyone to be that completely honorable, selfless style, individual, as a leader. But that I think we're being unrealistic that that's the case, and hence why chances are this is going to continue to unfold.
I think the human race has moved on, Stuart, and everyone has become a lot more aware, and lots of people work with people like us, coaching them, so they become all self-aware, and they recognize these traits early on. And a serious point, everybody's human, right? Let people be human, let them make a mistake. Interestingly, airlines are very good at that. Actually, they're very good at making mistakes and saying, oops, right, we made a mistake, how do we not let it happen again? So looking forward to discussion on Tuesday, diversity and inclusion. The week after that, I think we're into rebooting digital, which will be another conversation. So thank you, Stuart. We'll see everybody next Friday, 10 o'clock. Look forward to speaking to you then.
Will do. Cheers.
Cheers, sir.
I didn't get that.